think it's appropriate for me to start by saying Bruchim Habayim, which means blessed are all of us who've managed to get here, all of us who are here. And it feels like a real sacred moment for me to be in Las Vegas. I really did think that there was a possibility that the time that I would be coming up here next was not for this event, but was for Ted Herberger. Where is Ted? Where is he? Yeah, there he is. He's not just mi amigo, he's everybody's friend. That you'd have to dig that double wide grave and I'd be coming up in a casket. So I'm pleased to be up here with my wife Carol, and eventually our daughter Karina will be here as well, coming up from Albuquerque. Let me thank some people before I start my presentation. May I? And the first way I'm going to start a thank you is by thanking the Las Vegas Jewish community, because had there not been people here committed to the idea of having some Jewish life here and being prepared to reclaim this building, it would not have happened. I think it's important for me to also acknowledge an organization that I'm a part of and have been a part of for a long time, and that's the Montefiore Cemetery Association. Can you all hear me in the back? Yeah. Okay. And the Montefiore Cemetery Association really kept that sacred ground in shape and recognized that this was an important, the last piece, so to speak, of the historic Montefiore congregation. And so everyone that's associated with that, I thank you all. If I was going to thank someone individually beyond Ted at this point, I would want to thank some of the, and don't think I'm not appreciative of all of you. I am, and all of the people who are not here who contributed, for example, for our ability to buy back this building. It's fantastic. But I do want to thank some people in particular, and I hope you won't feel excluded if I do this. But if it weren't for the TERS, we would not be here today, and that's just a reality. And everyone had a hand in this. I don't know where Jimmy is now. He set the camera and then left. But Jimmy and his brother Louis, who I knew growing up as Butch, he's not here, so I can say about him. Carol made us digitize our home movies, and we have footage of Louis wearing a bright orange Nehru jacket with matching pants, mutton chop sideburns, and with just decked out in the most peace and lovey kind of neckwear. I'll have to show it to him, but he probably won't ever speak to me again after he sees it.
Can we get a copy of that, Joe?
You can. So it's wonderful to even be in the same place with Lori. If you don't know her, you need to meet her. One of the other TERS who's been an important part of my life, and you're in the home movies too, of course. So I just want to say, for all of you, some of you are connected to these historic families. Some of you are relative newcomers, having only been here 30, 40 years. But everyone has some reason to be here today, and I want to do something that feels to me almost impossible, which is to give you some feel for what I know of the Jewish community of Las Vegas and the environs, because it really was the epicenter of Jewish life in New Mexico and Colorado and the panhandle of Texas. I want to give you some sense of that. And Carol will tell you that on any one of these little side trips that I could take with you, I could talk for hours, and I promise you I won't. But it feels like a genuine challenge for me to be able to share with you the things that aren't in a book. There's no book about what I'm going to be telling you. There's some books you can read if you're interested in specific aspects. But the heart of what it is I want to share with you today feels like if I can impart a little bit of it, then I was done right by myself and by my ancestors, and I hope by you. So let's say together, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu, meaning who caused us to be able to arrive, Lazman hazeh, to this very, very special, remarkable moment. It's one of the times when saying Shehachianu really fits, because this is an arrival for all of us, particularly for me. So with that said, let me launch in, and if I'm not making sense, that's okay, because I want you to be able to challenge what I'm saying. You can ask questions. I will try and be mindful of the time. I brought with me a watch so I would know what time it is. Oh, this particular watch that I brought, everything is a prop for me, is my grandfather Joseph Taichert's pocket watch, which is a model from 1912. And 1912, you will find as I'm speaking to you, is a pivotal year. Why? Why is 1912 so important? Statehood, exactly. And so part of what I'm going to be talking about this morning is the life of Montefiore in the Jewish world in New Mexico before statehood, because that was the vital time when the pioneers who came out here, the two, Amsberg and Ellsberg, that set up shop here, the real pioneers, who were the ones who were then able to be already secure here. For whom? Anyone want to answer? The person who I don't want to overstate his importance, and I can't possibly understate it either, and that's Charles Ilfeld. So Charles Ilfeld did not come into a vacuum. There were already people here who were able to sponsor him, to help him get set up in business, to mentor him, and we think of him because it's so many generations ago, and there's Ilfelds here, right? Who's an Ilfeld? Raise your hand. There's a lot of Ilfelds. There's fantastic. So we think of him because he's your ancestor, right? And because we see pictures of him when we do as this old man, and we think of him as the starting point. So he's ancient in our minds. But he came here as a kid. He came here as a late teenager, and not with a lot of schooling. But I want you to think a lot of the time what we are seeing in the early days of the development of New Mexico Jewish community is that people would come here because they had uncles here, and uncles were incredibly important. They were like parents. They had cousins here. They had friends here. And even if they didn't know anyone here, if they were Jewish, they already found a place, because the community that was created even in the villages. And when I say villages, you all who are familiar with the Charles Ilfeld Company and its history will know that in practically every village from Colorado south, there was some little store that was set up with stock from and was doing business with the Charles Ilfeld Company. He really was the epicenter of not just I hate to use the word banking because it's not really accurate. He was the mercantile centerpiece of New Mexico's economy. Once the Patron system, if you're familiar with that, I'm not going to go into deep economics with you. It's one of those paths I could take, but I'm not going to. The Patron system was actually already dead by the time that the partido system was introduced in the 1800s and was perfected by Charles Ilfeld and other merchants. So it wasn't just the Ilfeld Company. There were others. So by that, I mean, just to give you a hint of what that's talking about, basically New Mexico was a practically feudal economy, a village-based economy. And there were certain families that were known as ricos, the wealthy people who would own large swaths of land, and people would work for them, but there wasn't a lot, and people would make their lives by growing and providing food and sustenance for themselves. But it was not a way in which people could build themselves individually. There was no capacity to do that under the Patron system. Under the partido system, things shifted, allowing people to get on credit the things that they needed to start a little store someplace in the hinterlands, and to then allow the people there also to have a goods-based economy and not just a cash-based economy. That's why it's a mistake to think of Charles Ilfeld, specifically the other Ilfeld brothers, and then the sons and the next generation down, as being involved in banking, because that implies that somebody went in there and got a loan. They weren't going, people were not going to Charles Ilfeld Company to get a loan. They were going to say, we grow crops of a particular type. We need the material to do that, and we will sell you those things, and then you will wholesale those things out. That was true for every kind of commodity that one can think of. And in fact, part of Charles Ilfeld's genius was that he could commoditize anything in New Mexico. So when you think of the Charles Ilfeld Company, and there is a book written about that company by Parish, one of the professors at UNM. It's worth reading if you haven't read it. If you're interested in economics, it's a blueprint for this mercantile period when people were able to create their own lives. Many of the people whose lives were flourished in an economic sense, these little towns that were based on these economies, were able to do so because of the relationship with the Ilfeld Company. Why? Because they couldn't go to a bank and get a loan. First of all, we didn't really have a banking system. Secondly, once we did develop a banking system, an actual banking system, that banking system was not equipped to give to the small person the goods necessary and to carry credit while their crops came to market. That just wasn't the way that people lived. And so it was far beyond the notion of a bank. People could go to Charles Ilfeld Company for all kinds of purposes, and it was a symbiotic relationship. So let me tell you something that you might find in a book, but I don't know, and I want to make sure that I mention this to you. You don't really get a spirit, the feel of Charles Ilfeld if you're just looking at it from the standpoint of economics. This was a person who, as a young man, came to this country. He didn't come to this country. He came to a different country. He came to this place that was not the United States and not Mexico, but which was very much tied into Mexico. And we like to think, this group doesn't like to think, but Americans like to think that there's some kind of wall between the United States and Mexico. But in fact, the reason that this is not the only reason that we are in fact linked to Mexico, but the original trade routes that connected this part of the world to anything as an economic and cultural engine was the trade route that wasn't overland through St. Louis, which came later. It was the trade route that went from Chihuahua to Taos, because Taos was the place where traditionally a couple of times a year, all people from all around, all the tribes, all the Hispanos, any European Anglo-type people or mixtures who were in the area were going to Taos for the markets, for the fairs that took place in Taos. And Taos was the original end of the line for this street of commerce, this trail of commerce running between what was New Mexico and Old Mexico. Here's what I was going to say to you, particularly for you Ilfeld descendants. And there's Nordhaus descendants here. There's Staab descendants here. There's everybody's here, right? Because the Ilfeld family married lots of other Jewish people, and so even if we're not actually related to one another, there is no doubt that we are all family, that we feel connected, because partly, I think that spirit that Charles and his brothers created, which was to welcome and envelop people and to bring them in and to recognize that was a competitive company. If they could enter any kind of business, trust me, they did it. Pinons, who thought of making a business out of Pinons? But I got from Bob Nordhaus the home movies of the Pinon production that I shared many years ago with the public television in Albuquerque, so that you could see what it was like, that operation of the Ilfeld Company. Pinons, wool, you name it. It was just a phenomenal series of operations. But what I wanted to say to you is about this spirit of this man and the spirit of the people who were around him, because it wasn't just Charles Ilfeld. So there's a fabulous book, if you have not read it, about the history of Arab immigration to New Mexico. You may or may not know that it was a heavy immigration, that there was a constant flow of people, especially from Lebanon, and particularly in the years around World War II. World War I. That era, and before, there was a lot of deprivation in the Arab world, particularly in Lebanon and Syria. And where did the young men, just like the young Jewish guys, the 18-year-olds, go? They came over here. They came to New Mexico. At one point, there were so many Arabs coming into New Mexico via Mexico, which was the way that they came in, that the United States government had to station people at the border who spoke what language? Arabic. How we've lost everything, almost everything of our history and our ignorance. It is, don't let me go down that pathway now. That's another path. I'm going to stop there. But the point of my mentioning this to you is in that book about Los Arabes, the Arabs in coming to New Mexico. One of the earliest people to come was someone who had nothing but was setting himself up as a merchant. One of these guys with a pack, he didn't have a store. And they came to Charles Ilfeld and they said, hey, you know, there's this fellow here. He's an Arab fellow. He's just arrived, and he's going to be setting up business. And what should we do? And what was Ilfeld's reaction? He said, "Let's help him. Let's help him." And that practice was repeated time and time again. It was a spirit. It was an attitude. It was a set of values that they had as people, and that they gained for the most part in young Jewish lives in Germany principally, but other places around Germany before coming to the New World. I'll give you one other little tidbit about this, and that is we're very close to Highlands, and this building here has a history with Highlands. So some of you may recognize the name Jesse Nusbaum. Does anybody here recognize the name Jesse Nusbaum? We have 1, 2, 3 hands, 4 hands. It's getting better. It's like an auction. So 5 hands. It's fantastic. So Jesse Nusbaum, for those of you who don't know, was a phenomenal figure who was born up in Greeley, which was a utopian community, if you can imagine that. And after he graduated from the normal school, from the teacher's college with a degree in Greeley, he came to his first job at the normal school that was in Las Vegas, New Mexico. He wasn't even 20, and he was teaching as a, quote, professor here at what would ultimately become Highlands. And when he arrived, he was teaching a number of things, including something called applied arts or practical arts. You may know that Nusbaum was ultimately, you probably don't know this because you don't know who Jesse Nusbaum was, but he was responsible for, among other things, excavating and stabilizing Pecos, Pueblo, that many of you may have passed. He was the superintendent of Mesa, Verde for the national parks for decades. He was the one who actually recreated and created from scratch the Palace of the Governors and the Museum of New Mexico, including all of the interiors of that building. So one of the things when he came here and he was teaching all kinds of things, including tin woodworking over here at the normal school, they said to him, okay, go ahead and do this. This is 1909, okay, when he got his first job over here, this kid. So he said, how am I going to do that? You've got no facilities for this. You got no equipment. You got nothing. And so the officials at the normal school said, what do you think they said to him? They said, go see Charles Ilfeld. So he went to see Charles Ilfeld. And what do you imagine? You fill in the blanks for me. What do you think Charles Ilfeld did? He's not a banker. He's not a bank. He's already involved in that normal school. He's already promoting education here. So when Jesse Nusbaum said, I need these things, who supplied the resources so that he could teach students at that early version of what ultimately became Highlands? So, again, I don't want to go too overboard with the importance of Charles, but let me shift for just a moment now to a different focus on this. Las Vegas, as you probably know, did quickly eclipse Taos as the place where the epicenter of economic life took place in what became the state of New Mexico, and it became also the hub of Jewish life. So that the the community that was already in existence here at the time that Montefiore was established, it was a very thriving, large community, the largest, the most important. And when you hear about firsts, like First Synagogue, First Cemetery, the firsts don't matter as much, really, as the weight, as the importance of these communities and these examples, these expressions of community. So in the 1800s, and we're going to have some remarkable documents for you to take a look at when you go inside in a little bit. Documents, books, papers on the table that you will see that reflect some of the vibrancy of the Jewish community that was created here in Las Vegas. And that I know from my own life in New Mexico and traveling around to all of these different places, not just New Mexico, into Colorado and Texas, that people would, Jewish people would trek where? To Las Vegas from absolutely all over, because this was a vibrant place. In some places that had German communities, the influence of German was so strong, in particular because there were lots of Christian Germans in the community. German remained this spoken language. It was really powerful. But that wasn't the pattern here in Las Vegas, New Mexico. In Las Vegas, New Mexico, the Germans, that's a loose term because you may be from Lithuanian and you're still German for this purpose, but the point is that that population was a different mix. It was 3/4 Jews who were here. And almost from the very start, the language that they used, in addition to Spanish, and in the case of my relatives and probably some of yours, they learned other languages like Navajo as needed to be engaged in the wool business, or in one of the other important businesses of the Ilfeld company, which was, of course, Indian goods. I didn't even go there. I could go for hours. Maybe if you ask me something about it, I will do that. But that notion of, I'll come back to it because I want to be mindful of the time, and I got to make more progress here than I am. So what I'm saying to you is this, that in the 1800s, this was not a German-speaking congregation. From the start, it was an English-speaking congregation, and it was really up to date. And when I say that to you, I mean they were engaged in every aspect of national and international Jewish life in a very sophisticated way. We have the documents to prove it. So let me quickly read this to you. The American Jewish Committee, I used to work for the American Jewish Committee in Denver. They just closed that office. It's the oldest community relations organization, human rights organization in the country. And they published every year for many decades the American Jewish Yearbook. This particular copy happens to come from a place called Congregation, Montefiore. That's where it's from. And they kept this. This was a way of understanding on an annual basis what was Jewish life like, not just in the U.S., but a survey of Jewish life, affairs, events, problems, interesting information, everywhere in the world. We almost had a real tragedy here.
Did they speak Yiddish here, presumably?
Jimmy just asked a question, and let me take that. I'll take that path for just a moment. So Jim just asked me if Yiddish was spoken here. Absolutely, for sure. Yiddish was an important trade language for people who were here. They might have been speaking some Yiddish to one another, but who were they speaking Yiddish to? In the case of at least my family, my grandfather, Joe Taichert, and my great uncle, Milton Taichert, and my uncle, Sam Goodman, these people were speaking Yiddish not just with suppliers and financiers and credit providers and trading partners in places like New York or in Europe. They were speaking Yiddish to whom? The people in Mexico. Because the trade continued to move always between New and Old Mexico. So yes, people did know Yiddish, but it's an interesting question. I don't want to go too deep into it. For my grandfather, he spoke a number of languages, but he was mostly speaking English. His younger brother Milton, he was speaking Yiddish to people who didn't have any clue what language he was speaking. If you ever went into Teichert's, you'd get regaled in English, Spanish, Yiddish, you name it. So the answer is yes, Yiddish was important. But in terms of the language of the intellectual and prayer activity of the Jewish life of these people, it was set already in English. So we have the American Jewish Yearbook. I picked one from the year 1914, 1915, just to give you, this is already 70 years after Jewish life as it existed here. I've just done a gigantically ridiculous leap. I'm going to go backwards in time. So stick with me. They list in here all of the subscribers to the American Jewish Yearbook, to the Jewish Publication Society of America. In other words, the major source of English language educational fictional works, Sunday school material, liturgical things. The Jewish Publication Society of America was the source of those things, centered in Philadelphia. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it in just a moment. But what I want to say to you is that each year, for the years that the yearbook was published by the committee, it lists the people who have been subscribers to receive those books and to support the work of the Jewish Publication Society of America. So I just picked this, 1914, 1915. Let's see what Jewish life was like in New Mexico in the year 5675. Okay? You with me? Have I lost you? Am I done?
Rabbi,
Yes?
where does that book come from? Why do you have a copy?
It's from this particular one was in the basement. Actually, I think it was either in the basement or in this outbuilding of my great uncle Milton, who lived over here on 7th Street.
And you saved all those books.
All these
for
books,
this moment, right?
all of these books for this moment. So listen to what Jewish life was like in New Mexico in that year. I won't read all the names, but in Albuquerque, the subscribers to the Jewish Publication Society consisted of Rabbi Moise Bergman, Julius Dreyfus, A. Fleischer, Mrs. Flournoy, Louis, what's that last name? What is that? Oh, Ilfeld on copper. Here's another one. Noah, what's that name? Ilfeld. Here's another one. Siegfried Kahn. Do these names begin to sound a little bit familiar to those of you who are New Mexicans? Julius Mandel, Ernest Myers. There's a Max Nordhaus listed here. Interesting. Already, because by these years, the early 1900s, already the second generation had shifted. There were many of those families who had been based here. The older ones stayed in Vegas. But where did the younger ones go? They were already setting up operations in Albuquerque, which completely understand is bypassing Santa Fe. Taos didn't work because it was isolated. It remains isolated. You can't get things to and from it. And Albuquerque and Las Vegas shared one important thing eventually. What was it in the late 1800s? A railroad, which left Santa Fe a village. I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. I'm saying it as a factual way. So let me keep going. I'm almost done. With that. So here's D. Rosenwald. That name. Look at this building. Look at the dedications in these books that I brought up for you. Look at the cemetery, and you'll see that name. So, and then there's another Rosenwald, and then I want to read this for you. Las Vegas, Isaac Apple. I have out on the table for you, be careful when you're touching these things. I have a little educational book that was used by one of the Apple children, and her name is in it. Remarkable, just remarkable. Again, from that trove that I saved from Milton, who preserved everything. If it was a document, it went to the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati. But if it was a book, it largely went to me. And if it was a Torah scroll, it went to Albuquerque or it went to Santa Fe. The Torah scroll you now have in the moment, for just so you know this, is the one that we've been using in our Havarah, our little group in Albuquerque. That scroll we ransomed from Raton, the congregation in Raton, but it's now sitting in your ark here. And there was obviously a relationship between the Jewish communities, same families, between Raton, Trinidad, and here. But Trinidad is so far across the mountains that's why there's a synagogue there. They all knew one another, but the distance was too great, the climb was too high. So Isaac Apple, Mrs. Simon Bacharach, there's another name. Incidentally, here's another tiny little, I could go an hour on this one, stop me, because I'm running out of time. So I ran across an amazing fact. Some of you Ilfelds may know this and can provide me with more information. But I discovered that there was an artist born here in Las Vegas whose name was Herman Ilfeld Bacharach. Any of you recognize this name? There's one, two. Good. There's two people who recognize who I'm talking about. Born here, went to school in Philadelphia. Think about what I've just said to you. This community is completely connected in a very thorough way to Jewish life and general life and educational life, far beyond the confines of Las Vegas or New Mexico. So Herman Ilfeld Bacharach went to school there, ultimately did a costume design for, among other things, the Ziegfeld Follies. But his artwork is in the Museum of Modern Art. And he was a WPA era artist making linocuts and other things while living here. He was the illustrator for the first version of Pinocchio, pre-Disney, if you can imagine that. Okay, let me go back to this. But you recognize that name, Bacharach, Isaac Davis, Charles Greenberg, and then it lists the Hebrew Ladies Benevolent Society. There was nothing else like it in New Mexico or the surrounding area. My grandmother and Mrs. Herman Ilfeld, ultimately they were about the last in the Ladies Benevolent Aid Society, but they did everything that was charitable in town. And they also provided for this Sunday school. When you go inside, one of the books, a couple of the books that you will see, have a stamp in there from Rabbi Bonheim, one of the early rabbis. The fact that we had rabbis, it was just a remarkable thing. And these were real rabbis, not faux ones. These were good, actual rabbis. This was an oddity in the West. If you look at that, you'll see Rabbi Bonheim's name stamped in books that were provided by the Ladies Hebrew Benevolent Aid Society for what? The Sunday school, because there were tons of kids. Remarkable. At any rate, the Hebrew Ladies Benevolent Society at 1027 8th Street in East Las Vegas. Those of you who know Las Vegas history, you could take me down a path. You won't do it. But this notion of East Las Vegas, West Las Vegas, when Charles Ilfeld set up shop here, it was Las Vegas, right? So let me keep going. I'm almost done with that list. So Charles Ilfeld, Cecilio Rosenwald, Dan Stern, Jacob Stern, Joseph Taichert, and David Winternitz. Now, there's one other listing for New Mexico. Guess where there was a subscriber? Don't guess. You want to guess? Not Wagon Mound. Good guess. We have Wagon Mound represented here by Vorenberg. No? You're getting warmer. Whoever said Cruces, it's wrong. There was Nathan Jaffa, of course, in Roswell. There's no Santa Fe, right? There's no Taos. There's none of these smaller towns. The epicenter of Jewish life, even though originally they had set up shop in these villages, it was here. So we have inside prayer books, including the most important prayer books that were not, quote, reform prayer books, that were the efforts to unify Jewish life in America. The early prayer book that you will see in there, be careful with it, is Minhag America, which was Isaac Mayer Wise' attempt. If you look at it, it looks like a prayer book, like a siddur. The variations are small. All of the occasions are marked in there. It doesn't really look like any Reform prayer book that came after it, because it was meant to be a prayer book for the entire Jewish America. That's why it was called the custom, the practices, the siddur, the custom of America, right from the start, replaced by the Union Prayer Book. But by the 1930s, and I have to say this to you because I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time, and I'm going back and forth by the decades. By the 1930s, it was not just the Union Prayer Book that was in use here. Again, English, Hebrew. There was also the original version of the Silverman Prayer Book. For you, it might make some sense, Marlis, but I don't know how many of you might have grown up in a American conservative congregation, but the most important early American conservative prayer book was that of Morris Silverman. And the earliest version of that prayer book was in use here in Congregation Montefiore. Years ago, Nancy would tell you this sad story. I gave a whole bunch of copies of it from here to one, not this version of the Las Vegas Jewish community, for use. And where those are, we have no clue. But I saved one. It's in there. It's in there. And the reason I'm mentioning it is by the 1930s, by the 1940s, the community was already very much in decline, having been taken over, eclipsed by Albuquerque. But it was still vital. There were still people here, especially during the time when Camp Luna was here. And where did the Jewish boys who were stationed at Camp Luna go? They went over here to 7th Street They went here, I'm sure. But they also, I know for a fact, were over here on 7th Street. They were having Shabbat dinner with my great Aunt Frances and my great Uncle Milton. Because during the war years in particular, the Jews of Las Vegas were as engaged as any in terms of what was happening to Jews in Europe. They undertook efforts to bring Jews over, including one member I know of the Ilfeld family was brought over and who got married in this building. And they went to great lengths to get this woman out of Europe as a young woman. My point in saying this to you is that by...
Sorry, who was that?
And Arnold Waxman.
The Waxman.
The Waxmans, that's correct. But that's just one example. The focus on this was... what time is it? I don't want to overstate the importance of my family. That would be wrong too. But I have to tell you that Joe Taichert, once he learned, his father was in the fur business in Europe. But once he came here as a young man, Las Vegas was already a well-developed Jewish community and an economic thriving center. This would be the place that a person who is having tubercular or pre-tubercular problems would end up, was right here. And ultimately, he learned from Charles Ilfeld Company about that trade in hides here locally and wool. He took over and worked in that area. There wasn't a threat to the Charles Ilfeld Company. They were doing everything. And he ultimately became the largest wool dealer in the territory. But one of the things that's important about that for you to know is what was the importance of the hides that this company of my grandfather's was sending to Mexico to be tanned. Well, an army needs boots. What was the importance of raising wool, sheep to get wool from the Four Corners to the Colorado border to here? Uniforms. The importance of these people as part of that fabric, and I don't mean a pun by that, it can't actually fully be appreciated because so much of the understanding of it has been lost. When we lost sheep culture here, that was really the end of Las Vegas as an economic engine, right? You don't have to say right. I'm just telling you, you don't have to agree with me. So I have so many documents. I'm going to shift to them now, and then I'll stop. So if any of you want to disagree or ask questions or whatever, I'll give you some chance to do that. So among the documents that Carol is making us, Carol is helping. Carol has cleaned out much of the garbage crap in our lives, and I'm a pack rat. I have all of this crap. Your mother knew that I was. Yeah, but your mother knew I had a penchant for keeping crap. One of the things, many things that we found, and I'll tell you what you're going to look at up at the table there. I found this little document here. I don't want it to blow away, and I don't have a way of displaying it for you folks. This happens to be the organ dedication service for Temple Montefiore, dated Wednesday, March 9th, 1921. How this little thing survived, how it was preserved, how I still have it, how I found it once I found it. It's remarkable. And I'm going to put it back in one of these books.
Could I interject just 1 second?
I don't know.
One thing we were hoping to find out is what happened to the organ.
Happened to what?
The organ that was donated.
And that's a mystery.
Any of
Anyone
you
who knows what Nancy's raising is the question of what happened to the organ that was in here. I want to dovetail now to some books so that you know what you're seeing. And some of the books I'm not sure I can let you see. I can just show you from here. And the wind is such I don't know. In this box is a complete set of machzors. Now machzor means cycle. And that means that there is a particularized prayer book for every one of the Jewish holidays. Not just Shabbat, not just the high holidays, but a special prayer book that include the prayers in the order of the service for all of these other occasions. And so Milton held on to it. God bless his memory. Milton held on to it. And it's been sitting on our shelf wherever we've lived for decades, right? And this is the complete set of machzors for all of the holidays. You might see that it says Ludwig Ilfeld. What a character this guy was. He was so connected to the outside world, to politics. He was just a remarkable figure. It doesn't do us any good to just talk about Charles without talking about some of these other amazing brothers, cousins. This one, I think, Ludwig is
His uncle.
this was a nephew.
Nephew of Charles.
This is a nephew.
My grandfather.
Say it louder.
My
Flores?
grandfather. And I have a story of his life, just
Go
very
for it.
quickly. I have a 6-page story, it's shortened, of his life that I can give you, that anyone asks me. I brought extra copies.
Fabulous, fabulous. And so you will appreciate it. And Larry, raise your hand. So Larry and I talked about this. I hope I'm not doing the wrong thing by mentioning this. I asked Larry, what do I do with this set of these amazing books? I haven't even told you what they are. You'll know it even more when I tell you. This particular set that has Ludwig Ilfeld's name on the covers of each one in gold is published in Breslau in 1886. So it's in Hebrew on this side. And of course, what is it on this side? German, right? A phenomenal thing, and part of the reason that I didn't want to just put this out on the table, I want this in complete set to remain intact. I am actually happy to have you look at it. If someone will take responsibility for that, I think it needs to go back to Albuquerque with us until the Las Vegas Jewish community has the right setup to showcase and preserve and protect these books. But Larry, am I speaking out of turn when I say that in thinking about, do I give this back to the Ilfeld family? I offered it to you. And what did you say that should happen to this?
I said it should go to the Jewish community in Las Vegas and be secured. I think that's the right place for it.
It's just a remarkable thing. It's a reflection of a remarkable person, a remarkable family, still remarkable. So can you put that back in there for me, Ted? What's in this bag? I feel reticent to even open it at this point. I brought it here, so maybe you'll believe that I have it. I guess we could take it out. I don't know how we can do it without the wind whipping it. The cover is not really attached to it any longer. It is if you want to know how vibrant and amazing this community was in the 1800s, this is, in my view, the symbol. Not a Torah scroll. Everyone had a Torah scroll, still do, I hope. But not everyone has what you all have and that has been living on my shelf for years, decades. And that is the Isaac Leeser Bible, which was the pulpit Bible for Temple Montefiore. It says Congregation Montefiore on the cover in a leather binding. It has names of people who were connected to the congregation. This was the first translation into English done of the Torah according to the Masoretic, meaning the traditional Jewish text. And it became the dominant one in the 1800s for not just English-speaking Jews in America, but in England, anywhere where there were English-speaking Jews. The Leeser Bible became the basis for reading, learning Torah, studying Torah, reading a translation in this building, which is where it came out of. And it's a beautiful document. But have I tested your patience too much? Can I go a little further? You tell me. Are you done?
No.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Keep going.
Okay. I'll stop soon. But I want to tell you about this remarkable document that I think is a symbol of Congregation Montefiore and the vitality of this Jewish community here. Isaac Leeser, just like these other people, like my grandfather, like Charles Ilfeld, like so many others, came to this country because he was a young man with no opportunity in Germany. He had been able to go to the gymnasia, meaning equivalent of something between high school and college, but he was still a teen when he lost his parents. How many times have we heard this story? And a relative, an uncle, helped him come to the United States, where he became a remarkable scholar. He never held himself out, as amazing as he was, and producing the first version of the Jewish Publication Society, and this complete translation of Torah. He was a Chazan. He worked for the oldest congregation in Philadelphia. He was the first non-Spanish, non-Sephardic Chazan for that congregation, that old congregation in Philadelphia. He was a scholar, an amazing scholar. What we have here is an American version of the German Mendelssohn Bible, which is a reflection of the Enlightenment in Europe. And so what do I mean by that? The translation itself, I think, is better than the translation that the Jewish Publication Society did in the early 1900s, in part because that was done by a committee, and this one was done by one man. But it isn't the translation that's so powerful for me. What means something to me as a rabbi and as a descendant of this place is that the comments, there are no comments in that early Jewish Publication Society. It's just a translation. But this is like the Mendelssohn Bible. This Leeser Bible has comments. Of course, it's a Jewish document, right? You don't just have a thing, right? The thing itself doesn't mean anything without the comments. That's the dialogue. So what is remarkable about it is that you have Rashi, you have Nachmanides, you have all of these ancient, medieval commentators explaining or amplifying what's in Torah. But they're in conversation with the most current, brightest students of what they called Wissenschaft des Judentums. In other words, of the scientific critical study of text. So you've got the most modern scholarship from people who did not believe that Moses was the author of this document, and they're in conversation in the comments with Rashi. In other words, it isn't just preserving the tradition, quote unquote, it's expanding the tradition to include the best of modern thought. And that's what these people were thinking and doing and reading when they heard the Torah being translated and using this well-worn book. This was not something that sat on the shelf. This sat on the pulpit. In there on the table, and with this I will stop. I will stop. I don't want to. I could go down many other paths. But I want to point out two documents in particular. You will see 2 volumes from the complete set of the Jewish Encyclopedia that was published by Funk and Wagnalls. It's not the later Jewish Encyclopedia that you've seen on the shelf. It's not the Encyclopedia Judaica. It's the first Jewish encyclopedia published in the United States. And you all, here in Las Vegas, eventually, it's yours. Just have to have a place for it, not in my garage any longer or in my bookshelves. I have the entire set of this. And when you go inside, what you will see is that Funk and Wagnalls didn't just create this document. There's a beautiful frontispiece. And it is dedicated, it's printed, and then the calligraphy to the people in Las Vegas, New Mexico, Congregation Montefiore, by name, who subscribed for this expensive and beautiful encyclopedia. And on the ultimate other volumes, it wasn't enough that just Funk and Wagnalls. It actually says from Funk and Wagnalls to the Jewish community of to Congregation Montefiore. The next of the rest of these volumes has the same material. We want to thank the following people in beautiful calligraphy. The following people, and you'll recognize the names, you'll see them when you go in, of these people who subscribed to pay for getting this beautiful encyclopedia here in Las Vegas. All I want, not all I want, I want other things. One of the things I want is I want you to be equipped so that you can safely not only preserve these books for the future, but to be able to show people and touch them. And I've got 2 boxes of books in there, in addition to what's on the table. And Nancy will tell you, we even have the Rabbi's Manual. Before it was called the Rabbi's Manual, it's called the Minister's Manual. The Rabbi's Manual from Las Vegas, from Congregation Montefiore, in which our predecessors have in pencil written down the names of the person for whom they're saying Kaddish or whom they're marrying. It's in there, and I gave it to Nancy to give to you all when she was observing the high holidays with us in Albuquerque. With that, I don't know even what time it is, but I'm done. I heard someone takes time. Any questions? Okay. So if there are no questions, then I want to just say it's been a treat. If you want to talk to me about any of this stuff, I'm not hidden. You can find me, and I will go down any of these paths with you. Thank you, John.
I'm just going to tell them.
Fabulous, John.
I'm just going to kind of tell you the logistical order right now. Thank you. So we're going inside, find a place on a pew. We'll take some of the chairs in. but we'll leave some out for the lunch. So we'll go in, and then Larry will become our MC. And we have people from all the different families speaking. Will you say something, perhaps? We'll see. And we won't talk a long time, but we'll talk, and then we'll have lunch. But I have to tell a Milton joke.
Tell them
Just real quick. Because you made me laugh, I almost cried. So John was talking about his Uncle Milton. A lot of you know Milton Taichert. And about all the languages you would hear in his store. But anytime somebody would say around Milton, "Oi," what would he say? "Oi, mañana." "Oi, mañana." He did that probably 30, 40 times a day, and he was just
It's
interesting.
a great joke.
You never heard him say that?
I did hear him. I wanted you to deliver the punchline. I'm going to
Okay.
say one more thing.
Okay.
I did not know, but for Jimmy, every one of you has contributed to my understanding that I've known through the course of time. But Jimmy shared something with me that I did not realize. If you are traveling, tooling around in Las Vegas, you come into town from the south and you see our wool warehouse, the Santa Fe Roundhouse. That was one of our wool houses. We had another one on National. But there was our wool warehouse here on Bridge Street. The sign, I don't know if you can still see the lettering for Joseph Wool Company. It hides in Spanish and English on that building on the corner there. But what I didn't know until Jimmy helped me understand this is that entire section that was centered around it economically, they call it, what do they call it? Bayanera. I'd never heard that before. And it means the wool area or the sheep area because that's the place that was centered around Joseph A. Taichert's wool warehouse. Who knew? Thank you. Thank you.
John, what's the explanation on the town of Ilfeld that you see the sign for on the way to Santa Fe?
Carol and I were looking for the town of Ilfeld. She can tell you exactly its longitude and latitude.
22 and a half miles south of Las Vegas.
Ilfeld is 22 and a half miles south of Las Vegas, and we kept looking for the sign that was there for many years that I remember growing up.
Ilfeld says he doesn't think it exists.
I don't think the sign is there anymore.
The sign is still there, one direction or the other, but what was the significance?
It was a post office, and it was one of these outposts, just like every other town around here.
But why was it named Ilfeld? That's my question.
Well, there was this family in New Mexico, by the name of Ilfeld. It's what's surprising, Jimmy, is that not everything in New Mexico is not named Ilfeld.
Okay.
The operation was in Gallup, Zuni, everywhere.
It started out, John, as that stop on the railroad where they would load sheep onto the cars. And it became so prolific that they put a sign calling it Ilfeld. In fact, the town of Ilfeld is, a bit west on the other side of the freeway.
I don't know if everybody heard Larry's better answer than mine. Come on up and say it over the microphone. Jim wanted to know what about this town of Ilfeld.
Hello, everybody. The town of Ilfeld actually started as a railroad stop on the line where Charles Ilfeld would load sheep on to be shipped out and sheared. And there what used to be a sign, I looked for it for years and couldn't find it, right on the railroad tracks. And people thought that that was actually the town of Ilfeld. In fact, the town of Ilfeld is about 10 miles outside of the freeway, and there's still an Ilfeld post office there to this day. But that's how it got started, as a stop by the railroad.
It was also a railroad siding. I think we're done. There's way more to talk about when the Charles Ilfeld Company had to take thousands of sheep to Mexico during a time when the economy was depressed and they couldn't even take the sheep into Arizona and had to take the sheep into Mexico. If you ever think that there is some division between Mexico and this place, I hope you'll rethink that.
Thank you.